Full Contact. In association with Mitsubishi Motors, drive your ambition.
Hello and welcome to Brian Moore's Full Contact with the Telegraph and Mitsubishi Motors. Just a week after securing their second trophy of the year, England now know their opponents for the 2023 Rugby World Cup. Eddie Jones' side have been drawn in Pool D, along with Japan, Argentina, Oceania 1, Americas 2. We'll be having England's finest reaction to that draw, and he'll be also reflecting on what has been a successful 2020 for them. Off the pitch, the game has been rocked with revelation that a number of former players are preparing legal action against rugby authorities after being diagnosed with early onset dementia. We'll be discussing the fallout from these cases, and we'll be hearing from the RFU Chief Executive Bill Sweeney, who is confident the impending lawsuits will not financially damage the union. The most recognised referee in the game was called time on his international career 2 weeks after becoming the first referee to do 100 test matches. Nigel Owens has announced he'll be stepping back from the game, and we'll be speaking to the man himself to look back at a glittering career and also what's ahead for him next. And as ever, we'll be taking a closer look at some of the work being done at grassroots level as part of the Mitsubishi Volunteer Recognition Programme. And alongside me today is the former Sevens England captain, Rob Vickerman. Hello, Rob.
Hi, Brian.
Well, let's read out the pools for people who haven't got them. Pool A, New Zealand, France, Italy, Americas 1, Africa 1. Pool B, South Africa, Ireland, Scotland, Asia Pacific 2, Europe 2. Pool C, Wales, Australia, Fiji, Europe 1 qualifier. Then Pool D, as we've said, England, Japan, Argentina, Oceania 1, Americas 2. There isn't the notorious pool of not quite so good in there. They're fairly even. They all have their own challenges.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, isn't it? I think your eyes are straight away drawn to Pool A to think about New Zealand, France going off. I mean, it is slightly bizarre notion as a caveat to be talking about a 2023 World Cup so far away, which I know probably grinds your bones internally, Brian. But I think it's exciting to see where these teams could well be. Where they are now is our snapshot, but where they could be, certainly France would be a scary prospect.
Yeah, exactly. Domestic, I don't know if it's harmony, Ireland, Scotland together in the South Africa group.
Yeah, again, similar, 2019 World Cup had the similar type of makeup to it. Australia, Fiji, I think it's the fourth time they've been pulled together as well. So it really is quite familiar in some scenarios here. But I think the first thing I do whenever I see pool draws, probably from my Sevens experience, isn't actually to look at the pools, is to look at the crossovers.
Yes.
And that's where it gets a little bit exciting. Loads of conversation. I think this is why it's exciting talking about it now. Because if, for our broadcasting point of view, this is going to be a narrative that you can pretty much cling on to for the next 2.5 years.
Well, I mean, one of the things about drawing it 3 years out, which I mean, to me is crazy, is you've given, Wales have got their own challenges. I mean, who knows where anyone will be. As you said, the crossovers, it means there are going to be some tasty quarterfinals straight away, doesn't it? No matter what way it falls.
Yeah, and that's why I love it. I mean, whenever you look at these formats, for me, it's always a quarterfinals that are the best games. So much at stake. You can't rest on your laurels or doing the maths after it. You're basically talking, you're losing, you're out. So, yeah, that's where I get excited about it. And the whole notion of just seeing this French team build toward 2023 is a frightening notion. I think the world will be looking just at how good they could be. And everybody that knows the prerequisite with France is how they play away from home. No troubles 2023. They're going to have jam-packed crowds every single time.
This is a crystal ball gazing. Do you think they've got the... I think they've got the raw materials in place. Do you think they have the discipline, the building power, the consistency to get where they might do?
I think the biggest thing they've got for them at the moment is some sort of unity across the politics side of things. Because if you've got someone like Macron, who was at the draw for this 2023 effort, you've got the firepower to say to these unions, your Pro 14s, the players' representatives and the clubs to get their heads together.
Yeah.
That if they align that's what's quite scary. I was chatting with Ben Kaiser just last weekend actually about it, all saying you're banging your head against the wall sometimes, but hopefully with it being a home tournament, if there's one thing that's going to galvanise the French bureaucracy, it could well be this, which I'm not too happy about.
No, we don't need this, do we?
No, we don't need it. The more chaos there, the better.
Exactly. We were talking about the England and their second trophy and whatever. To a certain extent, I always thought that the notion that the countries would suddenly throw off their shackles and play with gay abandon was a bit silly. But it turned out to be a lot more pragmatic than even I thought.
To be honest, I had the pleasure of being sidelined with Eddie Jones post games and asked the questions around the style of play. And he was almost kind of talking down the fact that this kicking entity was a known thing, that the rest of the world were just slow to pick up on it. And I'm not sure why. Like statistically, his words were, the more you kick it, the more you win. So you're hearing that from, the likes of Eddie Jones's coaching caliber. Of course, it's going to resonate worldwide. So I think that kicking technique and tactic has been something they've employed and been successful at. And as every single coach will attest to, you play to the laws, you try and break them, bend them, push them, whatever. But I think they were brilliant, England, just so ruthless, just like Saracens were probably 2 or 3 years ago. Efficient, effective, and energy saving. And that, really did show towards the end of the French game in particular.
Well, I don't know why people have been... I mean, I wrote about this. Honestly, I wrote about this. I got this from Eddie over 3 years ago. So all the modern pundits who've been coming in who seem to have missed this... because he told me that the stats that his team had produced proved conclusively that the teams that were more successful, and this included the All Blacks, kicked more often. And I was saying this is why they kick off front foot ball. When everyone's saying no, why are you doing that? We got ball to run. I said no, this is the way it goes, and it keeps on about this. And so why people have been late to the party, I have no idea. I just don't know why they've done it. Look, it isn't... And I also made this point in one of my columns. People are dishonest about this. If you have a kick that rakes 70 metres and everyone applauds it, or someone gets man and ball and you get a turnover or a penalty and everyone applauds it, that's still a kick. It's just as much a kick as the one that sails far too far, gives them too much time and looks boring. I said, you can't decry the strategy unless you decry both. You can't just say, oh, well, that's a good kick and that's a bad kick, therefore we only want you to kick well. We all know that. The point is, in the autumns, to me, England didn't do enough kicking of the right quality. It wasn't that they'd done... In that New Zealand game in the World Cup, which everyone, by common consent, says was one of the best games ever, they kicked only 2 times less than their average number of kicks in the autumns. So people just, I want to try and get some clarity into this and get people at least being honest. If you're going to say don't kick, that means don't kick well as well. You kick less all round. And to me, people have just not looked at this properly. And your take, I think, will surprise some people. You talking about them being fantastic, because people just want to see things that go well. They don't really care. They don't really understand that they're all of the same genre. So I sometimes I throw my hands up with people who are looking at games in this way.
I think the other thing just to look at is the actual skill required to do what they do. Like a box kick is one of the most difficult things to execute, and yet they're getting pretty good at it. 60-metre kicks on average are something that they pride themselves on. And the thing that certainly pitch side was really noticeable was when they kicked it, it was actually almost a competition to see who could get there first. So they weren't calling it a kick chase. They were calling it a kick race. And even that, in terms of the camaraderie they had with it, it was really effective to see if everybody buys into it. You're playing in the right area of the field. Quite simply, and this was Eddie Jones's mantra, you need to go from your 22 to their 22 as fast as you possibly can. Yes. That fastest transition is not going to be by playing. It's going to be by kicking. Yeah. And that just seems logical. And it's like tennis. No one complains about long form tennis shots. Yeah. You don't have to mix it up perhaps with a drop shot, but still, it's a very, very clever tactic, and it was executed beautifully, I thought.
Well, the draw for the 2023 Rugby World Cup has been made, and England are in Pool D along with Japan, Argentina, and the team from Oceania won Americas too. And I'm very pleased to say, to react to this, we've got none other than the big man himself, Eddie Jones. Mate, before we go on to the draw, what from the last World Cup do you think you can take as a lesson for the forthcoming one?
Well, it's your ability to get up after a big game. You've always got to be at your best to win the semi-final, and it's your ability to regenerate, refocus, and get ready for the next one. And that's something we'll continually work on for the next 3 years.
You mentioned the game at the moment is in a power phase. Now, I don't disagree with that. I just wonder about your approach to it. What do you do if it is such? Do you seek to match it, outmatch it, or find ways to get round it? What's your approach?
Well, there'll be some teams, mate, we take on with power, where we think we have a power advantage, and other teams will try to play around it. So it's no, we don't have a fixed style of play, and I think that's a bit of a furphy, to be honest. I think you play to your strengths. You always play to your strengths, and then you tactically manoeuvre your game to take away the strengths of the oppositions and attack their weaknesses.
Can I just ask you to explain, because we discussed this a long time ago and I wrote about it, and I don't know why it comes as a surprise to people now. The kicking stats, we were talking about the correlation between success and the teams that kick most. Can you explain those?
Yeah, well, France, you look at the game on Sunday, France stayed in the game for such a long period of time because they outkicked us. And at the moment, the longer you keep the ball at Test rugby, the more times you keep the ball over 3 phases, the greater the chance of turnover. And the more time you turn over the ball, the less chance you have of winning the game. So it's a pretty simple game at Test rugby at the moment. It's not the same at club rugby. And that's where people get a bit confused. At club rugby, you can probably keep the ball up to 8 phases. Test rugby, it's about 3. And then you have to be accurate, and you have to be attacking, and you have to be tactically good at kicking the ball.
See, my summation was, it wasn't that England's tactics were wrong. It was just didn't kick as well as they should have done. And people get it wrong. They think, a good kick is a kick, the same as a bad kick. Now, we talked a lot about transitioning. How far along have you got with that?
Yeah, no, really pleased, mate. Still very much in the infancy. We've still got nappies on, but the try that Johnny May scored, which Mara initiated against Ireland, that 100-metre try, brilliant try, and we're really working hard on that. We're giving a lot of priority. We've now got a tracking system that can measure the players' work off the ball, which is going to become increasingly important. So we feel like we're in a good position to take advantage of that in the future.
How do you respond to the claims of a lot of people that England are boring?
Well, yeah, I think it's all about playing good rugby, and every Six Nation game that I've been involved in, and Brian, you've been involved in a lot more than me, they're tough, physical, grinding games. And you've got to find a way to win them. And the only thing that counts in those sort of games is to win them. And you look at 2020, we won the Six Nations twice, once in its traditional form and once in a new form. Now, I don't think any team's ever done that.
Well, you mentioned the mantle of favourites. It hasn't always sat well. How do you, when you say England have to accept that, how do you go about implementing that mindset about them accepting without difficulty the tag of favourites?
Yeah, it's embracing the pressure, understanding that the pressure's coming, finding ways to look at it as an opportunity, not as a threat. And it took New Zealand 8 years to get over that, mate. And we're in our second stint now, and I would expect over the next period of time, with the growing maturity of the team, and I think, people don't understand how important it is to have a mature team to handle the pressure of big games. And we're starting to get that now. We've got some good young players coming through that are going to push the barrow. So it's a mindset, but it's also the practice of doing it, learning from it, and then going again.
Because I said I think part of the maturity is enjoying bullying people in the right way. Now, people threw their hands up in horror when I said this. I said, no. You've got to enjoy putting people away. It doesn't matter what the standard is. You set your own standards and you give it to people and you keep your foot on and you don't apologise, because that's not the way things work. Can I just finally talk about the 2023 draw? England in a pool with Japan and Argentina. What about that, and what about the possible crossovers?
Well, I always look at it, mate. You've got to win 4 big games. You've got to win 1 big game in your pool, and we might have to win 2 big games with Argentina and Japan. I'm in Japan at the moment. Everyone's excited. They couldn't be happier having England in the pool. And then you got to win your quarter, semi, and so the pool's exciting because it sort of sets your project in place. But the reality is nothing's really changed for us. We're going to be at our best. And that's all you can be, just be at your best.
Ball carrying, just as it comes up. We had a discussion about the variety of ways that defences are broken down. And we agreed at the time that England weren't quite there in terms of their sophistication of ball carrying. They did get there in the last World Cup, but it seems to me either they've been worked out or they're not quite where they were or on the variety of the angles and the people who take the ball into contact. Where are you on that?
Yeah, I think you're right there. Look, our attack was at its best in the World Cup because we had that really good preparation time. I think one thing, I just look at a number of sports at the moment. I don't think players are very sharp. And, the little detail, the 1 or 2 degrees, a half yard, and it's because they're playing back-to-back seasons, mate. And I'm not making excuses for the players. I'm not making excuses for the team, but that's the reality of sport. I see it in football. I don't see the passing as precise in football as possibly it has been, because the players, at the moment, we all know what they've got to do because we've got to keep the sport going, and it's so important. But what they're being asked to do is pretty huge, and I think they're coping well. And you'll see, I reckon, in the next 18 months, rugby will come back. He'll come back to some preciseness in attack, and people will get better at attacking rush defences. Even the 10th best team in the world now, can rush consistently. They can rush from second phase. Like we made a line break on second phase against Wales. On third phase, by the time George Ford got the ball, Bigger was straight on top of him. And that's the change in the defence, and you've got to get better at attacking that, mate.
Leadership. Have you got enough leaders? Where are they?
I think we're taking some really good steps forward. I think, Owens maturing as a captain. I thought Mare took a really big step forward in the way he led by example, and particularly that final where he was just a colossal for us. Mako continues to grow, and we've got a few others starting to spur it up. Young Tom Curry's starting to be a greater voice in the team. So I think we're moving in the right direction, but we'd always like to get there a bit quicker, but we're getting there, mate.
Eddie, great to speak to you. Thank you very much, mate. Take care.
All right. Look forward to catching up to you, mate. Good man.
Well, one of the intriguing prospects, Rob, with the crossovers, with it going to be A versus B and C versus D, runner-up against winner of either of the respective pools, possible quarterfinals. Well, your money would be on probably England-Wales, actually. England is a winner of Group D, Wales is a runner-up, possibly of Group C.
It's one way to appeal to the Welsh listeners, I guess, isn't it, Brian? You're getting those conversations going early.
I think that's the most likely, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the thing. When you talk about predating a draw 2.5 years, these are the types of conversations you get into, which is exciting, because then every single time you're going to get in England-Wales, you're talking about that extended narrative. So I think it is quite cool. I'm particularly liking the looks of A and B.
Well, I mean, you're probably going to get some formation of New Zealand, France, South Africa, Ireland, I would think. Possibly Scotland, but those are 2 humongous fixtures, whichever way they fall out.
Yeah, I just feel for Pool B. I mean, you're going to be grafting 3 weekends to try and get through pools.
And then
South Africa and Scotland.
New Zealand or France or the host. Yeah,
that's a horrible thing. It's almost like being given negative pocket money, isn't it?
Well, the thing is, I mean, and this is a long time out, as we're saying, but France by that time could well be around the number 1 team in the world, and at home as daunting, if not more so than New Zealand. Or it could go the other way, and France feel the pressure that a World Cup brings on host teams, and it not go well like it did with England in 2015.
was going to say, I can't think of many examples of that happening, to be honest. So, yeah. But I think that's it. This French team, there's going to be heaps of conversations over the next 2.5 years about their growth and development. We saw what was essentially their C team play England and do remarkably well. So the thought of having those guys nurtured and developed, 2023, home crowds, and you know what it's like. The French playing in France, there's a reason why it's called partisan, isn't it? It's just carnage.
The RFU Chief Executive Bill Sweeney has admitted it was sad and disturbing for the game this week that a number of former players took legal action against the union after being diagnosed with early onset dementia. Sweeney admitted that the revelations are concerning for the game, but insisted that the potential legal action will not financially damage the RFU.
A lot of people, most of the people who work in the sport, and that include most of the journalists who write about the sport, played the sport as well, and we've all got our previous playing histories on here. And society was different back then, and the knowledge was different back then, and the awareness of data was different back then. And as usual, you can only really focus on and control the things that you can control. So we can't control now those protocols and those whatever's was sitting in place there. We're really focused on what can we do today, what can we do going forward, and how can we make this the safest possible game and protect it as in the best way we possibly can. It's important to stress and point out, actually, we haven't received any formal legal approaches yet. So all we're knowledgeable about is what we're reading currently and what we're reading in the media. So we don't have any specific case or specific conditions that have been laid out for us. So it's a bit premature, really, and hypothetical to speculate on what's going there. And we haven't got into any detailed discussions around insurance or cover because we don't know the nature of what's being presented yet.
Rob, this is a tricky one, isn't it? Because no one has anything but the deepest sympathies for anyone who is suffering from any degenerative brain disease, and yet that's a long way from saying that rugby is culpable for it.
It is. It's a really tough place to be, isn't it? Because I get there's so many conversations to have about the process and the emotions around it, but ultimately it's come out as pretty powerful stories from two very big personalities in the game that you can't help but feel for. But having read your article and read a lot this weekend about it all, it has to be seen as a process of the litigation, which is much more formal, unfortunately. And at times, we talk about that emotion, but it has to be removed from it.
Yes, I mean, you were assessed as part of this. What was your experience?
Yeah, it's been interesting because I used to play with Alex Popham when I was at Leeds. So he basically canvassed all of his network and contacts to see who, if any of the players, had a significant amount of concussions. I spoke with him quite a bit over the years, and I had about 8 concussions in my last 2 years, but more often than not was always one of those players that tend to lead in with my face. So right. I was shortlisted as someone that needed further exploration. When talking about the symptoms and side effects, a few flagged up. So from that point on, this was in March 2020, spoke with Richard Boardman, who then said, look, this is the process of what's happening. We've got some really high profile players, but clearly the main concern is your health. How do you feel? So I went through generally what I was about and spoke a lot with my wife and family around the kind of emotions that associated with CTE. And not knowing much about that as an effect usually kicks in more post 5 years of retiring. So yes. That was certainly something I flagged because I'm now 35, so retired 5 years ago, all kind of aligned, and ultimately just wanted to know more about it. So I then progressed to speak with a neurologist who assessed me virtually, which was a slightly bizarre notion, having a conversation for 40 minutes, and they deemed that there weren't significant enough factors to progress, which actually was a real celebration because yes. My main concern with this is, and you'll probably attest to this too, Brian, it's like a horoscope. When people ask you if you feel certain traits, you're almost searching for
yes.
those traits.
Yes.
So I was acutely aware of that. And yeah, that's as far as it went, but clearly supporting Alex throughout. And I think they're ongoing now with the charity appeal, again, which aligns with what you were saying in your Telegraph article. That is very much going to be the case going forward.
Well, I mean, one of the problems is the variety of symptoms. If you look at the stuff that came out of the NFL, it isn't just forgetfulness. It is much more than that. It's behavioural changes, people becoming psychotic, people becoming not just amnesic, but significantly so they can't actually process elements of their daily life. If you look at the people involved, Justin Strelny and all the other people who started this off, the examination of them, they went from normal family people, to moments of inexplicable rage and people tearing things up, to tearing all their memorabilia up and so on. So those sort of things, are very difficult to live with, but they're very acute. And one of the problems that is now coming out is that I'm told by Willie Stewart, who is one of the chief neurologists who was on the working parties to start with, is that they are looking at the consequences being broadened to things like motor neuron disease and other things. And that's a problem for litigation as well, because if you can specify one particular aspect and say, yeah, this is what it causes, it's much easier to prove it than saying, well, it causes a whole range of things, because then you have to look into the general incidence of those in the wider population. It just makes it much more complex. And I was just thinking, and this was in a Telegraph article as well, look, given at the moment the relatively small number of people involved in this, and it is relative, and I'm not making light of their symptoms, it will be better for the parties to get together and say, look, let's look after these people properly. If they've got significant needs, let's help them and spend the money that way rather than spending it on 6 years, 8 years, which it will be if it gets to go through the High Court and Appeal Court and possibly the House of Lords, on lawyers who will take millions, which will not be seen by any of the people who are actually at the sharp end of this.
And I think that's always going to be a conversation you've got to have in the back of your mind, because clearly this is, a legal process that are very, very costly. So I think the general campaign of what Popham's talking about is got the title of Head for Change as the charitable arm to it. And I think that's right, because it's not just the players that clearly go through a lot. It's actually the support family. Because if you look at what could happen to, dominant male in the household, that's where it becomes really emotional. You only have to look at the Rob Burrow cases at the moment, and Christ, just end up tear-eyed thinking about it. But that is far more impactful than the players and the effect that they're going through. It's much more wide than that, which is why I think the charitable arm, it would be looked at favourably. Absolutely, I agree with you.
In terms of the liability of the companies, it isn't on all fours at all with the NFL. The NFL lied. The NFL set their own mild traumatic brain injury committee up, which wasn't properly staffed. It wasn't qualified. It erroneously reported over 15 years that there was no harm going to become long-term from concussions. And there is evidence that didn't come out in court that they withheld significant evidence that they had and the helmet manufacturers had. That isn't going to be the case here. It's going to be a case of looking at World Rugby and what did it do and what did the unions do around head injury protocols, because they came in virtually straight away when the NFL litigation started coming out. He'll be looking at those. Now, it's unfortunate we can't speak to anyone from that side, because I want to say to them, I have full support, for your players in getting you dealt with, in helping you and what have you. But the other side of it is what is actually being proposed to try and limit liability, because I don't think anyone really wants rugby to change so much out of recognition that it becomes a sport that we just don't recognise. So is it just limiting contact in training sessions, which I don't think would be a particularly controversial one? Is it changes, and if so, in laws, which ones, and so on? What do you think about that?
Interesting concept again. I get tying into your league backgrounds and what I've known from kind of idolising Leeds Rhinos when we were the sister club at Leeds Tykes. They only do about half an hour contact a week.
Yeah.
So they're all about technique, about process, knowing full well when you go into a game, you're gonna be good at contact because you have to be. So I think that's an interesting notion. Very different in a rugby union sense with the set piece and the scrummage engagement and hits and that type of impact and trauma. But the thing that was really remarkable, speaking to Popham about it, was that they've actually assumed and calculated that he's had around about 300,000 subconcussions.
Yes.
Which, when you start thinking about that in any format, be it, you're a rally driver, or you're a...
Can I just explain for people, just keep that chain of thought. Some concussions are when you get, little movements of the brain against the skull, but without anyone actually being concussed. So you don't go out, so no one can tell what's happening, but it's called subconcussive trauma. Sorry, carry on, Rob.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing that the people have to limit, because you're limited in terms of your minutes you play regularly. Why then would you not look at limiting the amount of contacts you have during the week? And I think that's a really sensible thing to do anyway, relevant of what's going on.
Yeah.
And that's where I think Popham's case really comes to light about looking at the training mechanisms, because, you've seen how big these men are.
Yep.
It's a pretty frightening concept to be training one-on-one with those types of individuals if you don't necessarily have to.
Yeah, absolutely. Can you see a situation where the game is emasculated or not?
No, I think the thing to look
sorry,
at...
that is a very pejorative word. I maybe let's just. Can you see a game which is radically different in the future?
No, and I don't think it will be necessarily that different, because essentially the game hasn't changed hugely, other than the 1992 law variation, which changed how the game was governed and refereed, which should be interesting to get Nigel's take on, actually. But just to speak about the progress that has happened. So the problem with the players at the moment coming forward is that they've played largely from 95 to, say, 2010 up to around that. So very much a different period to say, my generation, which was 2005 to 2015, or potentially up to 2020. Now, what's happened since then is that this whole sideline assessment conversation has gone through. And in 2012 was actually part of the very first one, where they could withdraw players who were symptomatic of concussion and assess them on the sideline and remove them from play, the HIA typically now.
Yep.
So that SCAT test, as it's known, Sports Concussion Assessment Tool, has been really rolled out across the board. It was also aligned with a little bit more of a fluffy one that was previously done for the 10 years prior to that, which was more of a cog sport test. And if people ever known anything about it, it was essentially where the playing cards, were on your screen and you had to look at a baseline reaction. So you could tell if people weren't quite functioning right. Now, what I think this is really important as a general conversation going forward is I also coach my son's team, the under-9s, and they are absolutely looking forward to the world of contact they're going to get into this year. And I think what's really interesting is now conversations that I have on the sideline with people that know nothing about rugby. They recognise what concussion looks like a little bit.
Yep.
So they're now in a position as parents and as coaches and referees to say, well, hang on, they don't quite look right. Let's take them away. Whereas before, certainly in my childhood, that never happened. The concussion just wasn't ever spoken about.
Yep.
So that's how I like to see the game's going to change. There's much more education and awareness of what that actually looks like.
Well, let's hope whatever happens in this, that we can limit it to a certain period of time, and that thereafter rugby gets itself into a position where it minimises the risks insofar as they can, and then it will be up to people, and this is a situation where, and it's going to be a choice for parents and so on. But I would stress this, and going forward again, when we're talking about the risks of rugby, you've also got to talk about what it gives. So when you're make a decision for your son or your daughter as to whether or not they do an activity, you don't just say, oh, there are risks there. You say, those are risks, contextualise them, how serious are they, and what are the benefits? And then you make your own decision, but not just on a risk basis.
Yeah, I think Lewis Moody absolutely nailed that in his column this week, speaking about, I understood those decisions. I played like a madman, but that was just my way of enjoying the game. And I think that has to be at the forefront of decisions for players and parents, certainly.
Full Contact, in association with Mitsubishi Motors. Everyone's ambitions are different. You can climb to the top, or you could take on uphill battles of a different kind. You can explore for hundreds of miles, or you could begin a bigger journey. You can make time fly, or you could make it stand still. The Mitsubishi SUV range. Drive your ambition.
In partnership with England Rugby, Mitsubishi Motors runs a volunteer recognition programme to provide the rugby community with opportunities to recognise and reward the volunteers who are the heartbeat of the game. Throughout the autumn, in association with Mitsubishi, I will be chatting to a selection of rugby volunteers to hear their stories and to shine a light on the brilliant work they've been doing during these most challenging of times. My guest for the 8th instalment is Kate Nichols, head coach of Witney Wolves. Kate, hi. Look, as a head coach of Witney Wolves, could you tell us more about your day-to-day role and what sort of support you've been receiving to get integrated into the wider club?
Okay, so to be honest, my role as a head coach is pretty much like every other head coach. I try and give my players the best experience on the pitch that I can give them. And obviously there's lots of sort of pastoral things going on behind the scenes, especially at the moment. Whitney is an absolutely amazing club, and they have been just faultless in their support of us. So has the RFU, I've got to say. So we do feel extremely lucky and extremely supported, and we're totally integrated. That was kind of my main aim when I became head coach, was that we were not a peripheral team or not a kind of sideline team or not a kind of box-ticking exercise, but we were, right in the mix with the rest of the teams at the club.
Because what makes the Wolves special?
What makes them special? Oh gosh, how long have you got? They're absolutely amazing. I think the club benefits as much from the Wolves as the Wolves benefits from the club. I think it's really rugby at its very best. Forget egos and sort of politics and all that kind of thing. My players play for the absolute sheer joy of playing rugby. And I think sometimes it's easy to lose that, isn't it? And so often when we have teams from around the club come and play with us, I see just such sheer joy on their faces because they've remembered exactly why they love to play the sport. Because
the special educational needs teams have different demands of the coaching. My daughters play at Wimbledon. They have a special needs team. People travel 50 miles to come for that. Why do you think it's so important to make rugby accessible to SEN people? I think, to be honest, in some ways we kind of turn it around and say, well, why shouldn't we be making it accessible? Fair point. They want to play rugby, and community rugby is about serving the community. So we should be making sure that anyone who wants to play can play. And like I said, I genuinely believe that these players give as much back to the game as we can offer them. What are the? Because there have to be slight differences in approach as to how you do that, or tell me, are there? Do you approach it in exactly the same way you did, or what sort of allowances do you have to make? It's just a good question. So I would say you do have to make sure you've got plenty of coaches, because we've got a really varied squad. So we've got two teams, a seniors and a juniors, but we have a massive range of ability. So we don't play contact. I know some teams do. We don't. We play a mix of touch and tag. But obviously, I've got some very, very skilled, competent players who need to be stretched. And then I've got players who won't be able to make it down the pitch, without the assistance of two coaches, probably. So you've got a really big range to kind of work out. But other than that, it's really important. I always stress that nobody who's ever coached the Wolves at Whitney has ever had any specific SEN training. We've all come from a rugby background. We all got hooked in for various reasons. And once you're in, it's so addictive you can't stop. But we've all just gone through the RFU training, which I just think is brilliant. And that's what we base it on. Well, you were selected via the Mitsubishi Motors Volunteer Recognition Program to run a coaching session in front of Eddie Jones last year. What was that like? Terrifying, as you can imagine. It was terrifying, but it was absolutely brilliant. There was 12 of us, and we all came from completely different backgrounds, coaching all sorts of different teams. And it was a really lovely experience to meet all those other coaches, but also to meet Phil Kearns from the RFU, who is this just amazing coaching lead. But also, Eddie Jones is just beyond inspirational. He just makes it so, he cuts to the quick of it all. He is so inspiring. He says, it doesn't matter who you're coaching, you coach the team in front of you, which is such a powerful message. So it was interactive. You did get to speak to him, yes. And he gave, he gives something back and so on. Absolutely. So we spoke to him before. We sat down and had a cup of coffee with him. Then he watched us coach and he gave us all individual feedback. He said, keep things really simple, repeat things, repetition all the time with a variation, really drill things home. And he said ultimately, and that was the thing that really stuck with me, he said ultimately, as a coach, you are there to serve your players. And if you are giving them the best possible experience on the pitch in the safest possible environment, then you really can't go too far wrong. I think it's a really powerful message. Look, it's been great to speak to you. Your enthusiasm shines through, Kate. Keep up the good work, keep up what you're doing, and keep Whitney Wolves going forward. Thank you very much for the invitation, Brian. It was lovely to chat to you. Thank you. For more details about the Mitsubishi Motors Volunteer Recognition Programme with England Rugby, visit www.englandrugby.com/participation/volunteers. Time to speak to Well, he was a regular contributor. I hope he will be in the future because he's got a bit more time on his hands now. Recently retired, the first referee to reach 100 Test matches. You know he is Nigel Owens. Hello, Nigel.
Hello, Brian. How are you? Long time no speak.
It is a long time. What was behind the decision to retire?
Yeah, quite a few things, to be honest, Brian. Age probably being one of them. I don't think people sort of appreciate really the commitment that is to refereeing at that level. You're travelling away from home so much, the discipline in training, your diet and everything that goes with it, and the pressures of it as well. And as well, I wasn't going to be around for 2023. Don't really want to be around for 2023 because I know I just can't commit to that time away anymore because I got the family at home, got family and friends I need to spend time with, which, I haven't been doing for the last sort of nearly 20 years at that level. And they obviously then have to plan for 2023 to bring younger, new referees through as well. So, there's quite a few decisions really that were part of it. And to be honest, I was hoping to referee in the Six Nations and then finish the season sort of naturally then at the Test match level in that Six Nations window. But it wasn't to be. And then after reflecting a bit about it all, I thought, well, what a better way to go out than on your 100th Test match, because the last thing you want to do is referee a game when you finish and all the controversy and you remembered for that last game. So, that game went well and it was a nice game to finish as well on the 100. And there's something about 100 and out as rather than 101 and out.
Fair enough. I just wondered this. Given the atypical nature of the games you've been refereeing in empty stadia, whether you'd want to actually get one out of the way in full to a full crowd so they could give you the undoubted round of applause or otherwise, make it plain, what they thought and then how much you appreciated.
Yeah, that would be nice, as long as the game went well and they weren't booing, then that would be great, yes. But, yes, that would have been nice. And I'm still going to referee the Pro 14 till the end of the season, hopefully if I'm selected. So, hopefully I'll be able to referee a game towards the end of the season, the Pro 14. Hopefully by then we will have the crowds back. I'm not quite sure what's happening with Judgment Day this year, if it's going to happen. If it is and the crowd's going to be there, then, and if I would be involved in one of those games, then great. It'd be a nice way to finish. Yeah, so it would be nice to finish, with the spectators and be part of that atmosphere and occasion, which does make it, very, very special. I think if anybody had any doubt, like the players are the most important part of the game. But I think also as well, as important as them are the spectators, because I think we've seen now in this last sort of 10 months or so that, it's not the same without the spectators. So if anybody had any doubt how important spectators are to the game at all levels of the game, then there shouldn't be any doubt now. So it would have been nice to do that. And hopefully, I'll get an opportunity towards the end of the season in the Pro 14 to do that, hopefully, yeah.
And as it's Rob Vickerman here, certainly hope so. You get another chance. Just a question with what World Rugby tend to do with referees who perhaps are hanging the whistle up, the mentoring programme, passing on your knowledge and wisdom and hopefully some of your one-liners. Has that been something spoke about?
No, not really, no, to be honest. I'm going to be doing that with the Welsh Rugby Union. It's something that was part of the plan, to be honest, or part of the discussions from, a couple of years ago, that when I did hang up the whistle, that I would move into a coaching role within the Welsh Rugby Union, looking after a couple of the young referees we have and one or two of the referees in the academy system we have here in Wales. And I've started doing that already the last sort of season or so anyway, but obviously now with more time, I'll get more into it now, and I'll be looking after probably two of the professional referees and maybe one or two then below that as well, in bringing them through. Now, whether it'll be something like that World Rugby would like me to get involved with, I honestly don't know. I haven't had those discussions with anybody around that, but certainly from the Welsh Rugby Union point of view, yeah, that's what is going to be happening, and that is happening now, really, to be honest.
Nigel, you mentioned, I'm sure I read this, you thought about hoping for a family. Now, if that were to be the case, which route would it be? Surrogacy, adoption, or what?
Yeah, it's a good question, Brian. It's something that we started discussing myself and my partner Barry, and obviously now that's probably another part of the equation where I don't want to be away so much, on the refereeing side of things. we've started discussing about it, and I'm probably more inclined along the surrogate side of things. I would think, I remember Glenn Jackson and a few of the other boys, particularly because when we were in the World Cup in 2015 and even 2019 and 2011 as well, families came over and the kids were there, and I'd spend a lot of time with the kids playing cards with them, or sometimes even babysitting, whilst their parents, went out for a night out or something, and a lot of them told me, Glenn Jackson told me, you'd make a great dad, you must become a dad one day. And I said, well, I don't know, at least now I can give the kids back when you've had enough. When you're a dad, you can't do that. So it is something we are discussed, and we are discussing the options of it. And, when we're ready to take it further, then we'll have to really sit down and see how it goes with the surrogacy or adoption, or maybe the both. We don't know yet. So that'll be an ongoing discussion, really, as the time goes by now. Well,
thanks for being candid about it. I'll just put my 2 pence in on that. I'm the product of an adoption from an adopted family of 2 natural and 4. So they can work, and they can be of great benefit to all round. Look, let's just stick to this as a final question. Out of 100 games, can you give us 2 or 3 highlights? New Zealand, South Africa, New Zealand. That
definitely South Africa, New Zealand in 2013 in Ellis Park. Because that'll go down as one of the great games of all time. And people like Steve Hansen, McCall, and these tell me every time I see them, that's the greatest game they've seen or been involved in. And a lot of people say the same thing. So definitely that one. And obviously then the World Cup final then would be probably the highlight of it all, I would think. Not so much, I think it was a great final. It's probably the best World Cup final I've actually been. It's probably the best tournament that has been as far as quality and stuff goes in the rugby played in 2015. And then probably another game, Brian, which it's not a test match, but I'll tell you why it's in highlight, because to me this sums up what rugby is all about. I was asked, I went to do a Q&A, myself and Dan Lydiat, in Pencoed Rugby Club on a Wednesday night. And we were meeting the sort of junior section first, and then the adult version later on. And the coach of the under-12s in Pencoed said, in about 5 weeks' time, we're playing a big cup game against Cwmbran, both unbeaten sides in Wales, all the way through the age groups. Would you mind coming ref in that game? I said, well, yeah, if I can, I will. And then I won't tell the boys, and be a surprise when you turn up. So it happened to be I was appointed to referee Leicester against Ulster in the last pool game, qualifying game up in Welford Road on the Saturday night, 5:30 kickoff. So I rang Pencoed. I said, look, I'm reffing at 5:30 on Saturday night. I'll drive home after the game, because Derek Bevan and stuff was my team for many years, and we always had a rule that wherever we referee, we stayed there a few beers at night in Europe. So I said, I'll travel back after the game. I won't get back till 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. It's about 4 or 5 hour drive. If you can delay the kickoff for an hour or 2 on the Sunday morning, I'll come and do the game. So anyway, got back from Leicester. They moved the kickoff from 10:30 back to 12. Got a Pencoed. Went in the changing rooms. Kids didn't know I was arriving. The pictures on my face was a picture, that some of the jaws are dropping, and oh my God, it's Nigel Owens who's going to referee us and this and that. And then as I go around the changing room, just checking the boots, just, making it all feel a bit special for them. And little winger sitting in the corner of the changing room just said, he said, I hope you're going to referee this game better today than you did last night. I thought to myself, this is what makes it so special. This guy doesn't care. All he wants is that I referee his game. But he's fine, and to me, that would be a highlight as well, Brian, as well as the many, many others.
Oh, that's a brilliant story to end on. Thank you, Nigel. I hope you'll come on the podcast again in the future, mate. Congratulations on the 100 and everything else that comes after.
Yeah, thanks, Brian, and look forward to chatting to you again soon. All the best.
Time very quickly to move on to the Champions Cup roundup. 2 favourites, Exeter and Leinster, picked up wins on the opening weekend. Very difficult to make anything out of this at the very early stages, but do you expect these 2 sides to be there or thereabouts in the end?
I do actually. I think, when you're looking at this new format, which, would take a whole show in itself to explain, but essentially the fact that Toulouse were finished 7th, Montpellier 8th in the top 14 means that there's some really juicy group games, whereas normally there'd be a few walkovers.
Yeah.
In this one, you need to be winning every game to qualify, but I think, you're not going to be far off. Exeter just looks stunning. I guess playing down in Sandy Park with fans is always going to be a powerful game. Hell of a test for them this weekend, upcoming taking on Toulouse. I think it's going to be a really, really cracking tournament. And I like the format. It's fresh, it's different, and every game feels like there's a little bit more to play for the top end.
And of course, this season has always got the Six Nations and Lions Tours on the horizon as well. Everything, in the end will bow down to that, won't it?
God, we're not shy rugby this year. Yeah, I know we've had 8 months of absolute pain, but this is going to be some build-up, isn't it? We're looking at basically the next 6-7 months just been jam-packed every weekend, which is exactly where we want to be. So kudos to the organisers. Can't imagine it's been easy at all. And it's just great to see these teams going at it. But I do have to say, what is it with the French and a Champions Cup format? Because it just seems to be, they just go to different levels of performance. It must be partly inspiring.
They do, apart from the finals.
Yeah, apart from the finals, yeah. But that's a wonderful prospect. I actually put Glasgow-Lyon this weekend, actually. So looking forward to see how Lyon are going to go. They're kind of coming up the ranks, finished really well in the top 14, are unknown compared to some of the others in the Heineken Cup. But I think it's going to be great spectacle this year for sure.
Well, that's all we have time for on Brian Moore's Full Contact this week with The Telegraph. A huge thank you to my co-host, Rob Vickerman, and all I guess. I tell you, I like Rob because you always get something different. He's got a different take, he's got a different philosophy. A great co-host. Listen, if you've enjoyed this episode, why not subscribe? Check out some of our previous episodes and stay up to date on all things sport. You can head to telegraph.co.uk/contact, where listeners can get 30 days access to all the Telegraph's premium sports coverage completely free. But for now, it's goodbye.
Full Contact. In association with Mitsubishi Motors. Drive your ambition.